So yes, I'm Catherine. I'm Smarter Planet, Smarter Cities. And essentially what I'd like to do is to just put a high-level context of why is IBM interested in smarter cities. So I'd like to show you a short video.
Our planet is alive with data. It's generated by cars on a freeway, patients in a hospital, electricity in the grid. The more we understand data, the more answers we find. Patterns are easing traffic in over 400 cities, detecting disease faster, reducing energy costs by 10%. On a smarter planet, we can analyze all the data we now see to make the world work better. Let's build a smarter planet.
Okay. So I think hopefully that gave you some context. Essentially, we're in the business of big data and analytics. And I spend my time travelling around the countryside, this wonderful nation of ours, as well as overseas, trying to help not just the government organisations, but the private sector, about looking at the data that they have and understanding how that can actually help them optimise systems. And I actually am passionate about university towns, and it's great to be in Newcastle. And I'm kind of written quite a few papers and points of view around the fact that I believe that in this nation we have huge opportunity to unlock the prosperity of our regions. And I will share with you through this presentation the work that I've recently been doing, just flew back again last week from Port Hedland, in places like the Pilbara and also Townsville. So I think it's very relevant that it's not just a big city problem in terms of being able to use advanced technology to really make regions prosper and thrive. And it's very pleasant driving into Newcastle because I pick up nuances every place I go to. So as I'm driving off the freeway into Newcastle, I can see I'm coming down the main road and I'm already seeing some lovely warning signs telling me that there's congestion ahead. That's a smart city. That's good for me because I'm slowing down and understanding what's going on. And it's also nice to see that the city is a very proud city with all of its wonderful banners about what it's doing. So it's very exciting to be here today. But essentially, I'm going to propose a couple of key points today. And that is that we are actually living in a world where the physical is meeting the digital. And it has huge relevance in terms of the way that we live our daily lives. But we have a problem. And people talk about smarter cities potentially as maybe the next greatest thing or something that we should all be considering. But the reason why we need to consider it is that fundamentally what's happening in Australia is at critical point. The productivity of our nation is declining at a rapid rate. And the reality is that as we see new regions opening up, Australia as a nation and in terms of the way that its cities perform in terms of their productivity also will determine how they actually thrive and survive as we move into a digital services economy. So the interesting thing, though, is on the positive side, though, we actually have a world-beating population growth rate. We've got a higher growth rate than India and China, albeit off a low base, right? Perth is going through phenomenal growth. And anybody in this room who thinks that the mining boom is over, think again. The reality is that what we're seeing in the mining resources sector is we've gone into the construction phase. We are now moving into operate phase. And essentially what we're seeing is that cities like Perth are straining at the knees in terms of dealing with things such as accommodation, housing affordability, transport, and also being able to attract and retain talent that's required to actually manage and operate quite sophisticated businesses such as natural resources. Everybody talks about world's most livable cities. And I think that you're probably living in one of the world's most livable, beautiful regional cities. But essentially we hear about the same old, same old. Melbourne's won it 3 times a year, 3 times in 3 years, so to speak, which I think is wonderful. But I caution essentially the need for us to focus on livable cities because being an Oscar winning in terms of livable cities, as we move out over the next 5 to 10 years, the differentiator on that index will actually be the capability of those cities to actually also be smarter. So what do I mean by smarter? Let's just take a step back. We Absolutely, in a time of our history, which we call the era of smart. And luckily for me in my career, even though starting off as an urban planner and an economist and then moving into digital infrastructure, we're actually in the fourth phase of the internet. So we started off in the early days with the World Wide Web and search. We then moved into online real estate and information exchanges and putting all of those that information services out there. We're now moving into, of course, the heavy focus around online retailing, and essentially the reality is that we will actually have more devices and things connected through the internet than people. So we call that the Internet of Things. Couple that with the fact that the world is becoming highly instrumented through things such as RFID sensors and devices, you then have the opportunity to look into massive amount of information that's actually been collected and worked through. And interestingly enough, I found the last session absolutely fascinating because IBM actually is probably a little bit involved, well, in fact, quite a lot involved with the Miami Dolphins. So if you go to YouTube and type in Miami Dolphins IBM, the ability of that stadium to be able to collect information and link that to the point of sale has actually been achieved by technology and open platforms that we've been deploying in social media and intelligent operations, so that actually things such as stadiums can actually be smarter and actually can have a greater customer experience. So essentially what I'm sharing with you there is that the game is changing, and cities that get activated about understanding the nuances and the technological shifts will actually thrive. What does a smarter city look like? There's many versions of smarter cities, and these are some great pictures of smarter cities. As an urban planner and urban designer, I like some of these pictures. You can sort of see essentially some of the dynamics that's playing out here, and different countries have different views. We live in a nation where it's not easy to centrally plan cities. So essentially we're having to deal with a lot of existing infrastructure, regulatory and policy constraints, and so we have to be very creative about how we build out a smarter city. In our view, though, we've actually, over the last couple of years, worked on over 2,000 projects in smarter cities, and we're seeing some interesting trends. But I think one area that's really exciting is what's happening in things such as healthcare and aged care. And for example, in the city of Bolzano, we've actually been using connected devices and intelligence to help people who want to live in their homes to be more inclusive in society, to be able to make ahead-of-time bookings with their clinicians, be able to book taxis ahead of time so they can make their ways to the supermarket. But not only that, as they're moving through the city, providing sensors for people who are aged that have a hearing difficulty or potentially have a disability to guide them through the best way through the city. So essentially, our philosophy around applying the technology is the ability to put the citizen in the centre and then work through the navigation of the city to look at data points of how that could be achieved. In Dubuque, we've actually been monitoring pilots in energy and water, which has provided a huge opportunity to look at water optimisation. And essentially, where possible, what we're trying to do is take assets that we've used overseas and repeat them across many different cities. So I've been a very busy person the last couple of years, and in fact, just recently also working in places, as I can show you here, Townsville, Geraldton, and the Pilbara. And I deliberately put in some regional context today because I was mindful of the wonderful city that I was coming to today. If I look at Townsville, Townsville are very clear about where they want to see themselves in the world. Does anybody know what Townsville's vision is? Townsville's vision is very simple. They want to be the world's most sustainable city. And they are actually on their pathway to doing that. They have an island called Magnetic Island, which is now completely instrumented for energy through solar. The reality is that is also in a cyclone. The city's in a cyclone zone. So they have a lot of issues pertaining to the way in which the environment impacts their water and their energy usage. So they've been engaging with IBM and our partners, and we're actually employing what we call integrated energy, water and waste systems. Now that might seem pretty simple at the outset, but I don't know if anybody's tried getting a single bill from Telstra. Try getting a single bill, or at least a single view of your energy, water and sewerage costs, and how you can actually then influence the consumption. Now, the other point too is that it actually takes energy to move water. So as you turn the tap on, particularly in a lot of cities in Australia, that actually uses energy and pumps to actually move that water down into your sink. So essentially we've deployed this in 250 homes with dashboards. We will be rolling that right across the town, and we've actually already seen a 15% reduction in water use. We've actually detected that 30% of the water isn't actually getting to the houses because there's leakage in the system. And the reason why we're able to ascertain that is because we're using advanced analytics, not just at the household end, but also at the utility end, using things such as sensors and meters and dashboards and portals so that we can actually build out a model. That's interesting at one point, but the reality is that this town has to actually move on an integrated approach because it doesn't have $600 million, which is going to be the cost of what it would take to build a new water pipe to deal with their future planning and growth. So there's definitely economic rationale for cities to look at this infrastructure and this approach. If we look at Geraldton, very exciting. Off the backbone of the NBN, we're in the process of building one of the first largest regional digital hubs. And that will be providing business services, data services for the mid-cap iron ore, for the agribusiness, ports and businesses within Geraldton. Many of you may not know, but pretty much the backhaul stops at Geraldton from a telecommunications perspective. So towns up in the Pilbara have actually had to roll out their own LTE networks in order for them to be able to enable big data services. If I shift then to the Pilbara is a fascinating place. The government has decided that they want to grow the Pilbara by 100%. Has anybody been to the Pilbara? What's your first impression? Windy, dusty. It's an interesting place. I think it could be beautiful with a couple of palm trees if they didn't fall over during the cyclone season. But it's not exactly the most comfortable place to live. Every day, fly-in, fly-out workers fly into the towns of the Pilbara. And the truth of the matter is that, despite what you've heard on the media, the majority of those workers are actually Australians. They're highly skilled and they're highly motivated and they're working on really interesting projects. But it costs $750,000 on average per FIFO worker to house, clean, transport, entertain, whilst they are on duties doing their work in the Pilbara. It is not uncommon for a FIFO worker to admit, and I've run some workshops recently, where one young chap piped up and said, actually, Catherine, I'll admit it, I leave my air conditioning on in the patio because it's so hot up there, I can't stand sitting out there with my beer without the aircon on. So what actually happens is the FIFO workers fly in, they go to their work, the air conditioners are running through their dongas or through the houses that they're living in Karratha or Newman. They leave it on, they fly home. The air conditioning is still running. They'll come back 4 or 5 days later to a nice cool donga. Is that sustainable? Absolutely not. So essentially, again, you can see the logic of where applying smarter mining villages concepts where we can start looking at integrating things such as smart home. So picture this. The FIFO worker flies in at Karratha, he's got his smartphone device. At that time, the air conditioning is turned on. Not only that, it can actually select his favourite Foxtel and he can check that his favourite rugby or AFL game was recorded. And they can go about their merry business. But at the same time, because all of the bills are paid by the mining companies, there is a much smarter way that they can actually look into that. So that's just a bit of an insight of the sorts of projects that we're working on in regions to try to make them smarter and more sustainable. I spoke about the world's most livable cities. We now have indexes for the world's smartest cities. So what does a smarter city look like? It looks like Vienna. So Vienna has been ranked #1 in the world as the world's smartest city. And the reason why Vienna's been ranked #1 is because it's got very activated and excited about its carbon footprint footprint around transport. It has a bike exchange program, and it's wonderful to see a lot of the cities in Australia starting to do that. I understand the issue with the helmets. I hate wearing a helmet, but I think Melbourne got over by that because I think they're now providing, disposable helmets. But essentially, Vienna's a pretty cool place. You then shift to a place like London, where they're using things such as city dashboards. Essentially, they're leveraging things such as open data to provide very accurate information on the pulse of the city across a whole range of indicators. So you can see essentially up there things such as, what's happening in the climate, and essentially, how far the carbon levels are at the point of time. I don't know if many of you noticed driving around London, but the other time I was there, which wasn't long ago, they've got a really neat system, which is where because they're monitoring the carbon levels coming off the motorways, if the carbon level goes to a point that is actually harmful to the community, you actually can't get off at that point. And it warns you further up the line to say, can't turn off to Middlesex because the carbon rating is too high, you need to turn off at the next exit. So it's a really interesting way. And how they're actually driving usage is through things such as congestion tax. They've just decided that they don't want London to be as polluted as it was. So they've actually introducing congestion tax, and now, of course, it really limits the amount of traffic that's going into town. And then the octopus card. Does anybody have an octopus card or whatever? The use of smart cards. So these are the sorts of concepts that we see that are being deployed by smarter cities. And I'm really excited about the whole space in terms of social media and applications and open data. And I think, if nothing else, when I was a young urban planner having to do a community consultation exercise, I would write out a nice little letter, go and get somebody to go and post it all out, and then wait for people to come and throw eggs at me. These days, 24/7, citizens have the opportunity to actually provide feedback. And interestingly enough, not all of these websites are actually done by local government. Make Sydney Work, which is Make Sydney Work, Make Melbourne Work, Make Perth Work, is a national initiative by the Property Council of Australia, by Peter Verwer, who had this vision that he wanted to know what was really the gripe of people in cities. So I think we'll see more of this. And then down here we've got Arrivo Sydney, which is $2.99 on the Google App Store or iTunes, and came out about opening up the data by Transport for New South Wales, and so smart app developers have created that great application. I just wanted to quickly share with you, I spoke earlier around the concept of big data. One thing I will say is that these smart apps that you're currently getting with regards to transport are using publicly available information such as bus timetables or things along those lines. But I just want to shift your focus through a different lens, which is where we're deploying concepts, not just concepts, but systems, which is actually analysing billions of pieces of data from telco networks to actually guide planning for things such as transport, logistics, and passenger management. And so the image I have up here on the left, Cities in Motion, is an example of a project we've got going in Istanbul, city of 2.9 million people. That information is in real time. Not possible to do through a smart app because it is billions of pieces of data. But essentially what I'm sharing with you is the ability of what we call stream computing. The ability of large data sets in real time and for information to be visualised and modelled. And essentially that's creating great value for the city. And then on the other side here, we have the project we've got going in Lyon, which is a multimodal approach, which again looks at the way in which a city moves, not just through a motorway, but also through the other modes of transport, and can also provide things such as navigators for people as they're walking or driving or cycling through the city. And look, the future is fast approaching. I don't know if you're familiar with M2M. I know that there were some sessions yesterday, so I don't want to repeat because I know there was a lot of autonomous vehicle sessions. But the reality, it's happening. And I had the really quirky, weird experience of getting in one of these driverless cars in Canada last year. I went to the Volvo Centre and they put me in this car and said, right, Catherine, just sit and relax and we'll take you for a drive. Well, I've got to say it was harrowing. I didn't feel comfortable about not being able to, move it around. But sure enough, it took me around the area and I got out and I thought, not sure if I like that. But the craziest thing is, and this is true, a couple of American pizza firms are actually looking at deploying drones and testing this to deliver your pizza. So if you think that's far-fetched, the reality is that drones are being used in cities around the world. There are a lot of issues around security and surveillance, but essentially law enforcement agencies are really getting onto this. And I think most of you, if you've travelled down the F3, you've noticed the white markers on the line, right? It's a time of distance travel. So as you work through those lines, they're calculating, right, what average speed, and then you get the ticket. So whether we like it or not, the reality is that this sort of technology is fast approaching. I don't want to focus on the negative. I think there's a lot of positives to come out of this, particularly from safety. But, I think people will come up with fantastic ideas of how drones could be used in the city context. And I spoke about earlier the concept of big data. This is my definition of big data, which I call high velocity, high volume, and high value information, which enables you to gain better insights for social, economic, and environmental outcomes. The picture that you show here is actually the Intelligent Operations Centre in Rio de Janeiro. It was actually built 3 years ago. It's using IBM's Intelligent Operations Open Platform. It enables data across policing, transport, weather, to be able to be viewed in real time. And essentially it came out of the fact that in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, when the floods come in, they lose life. And actually, since this system has been deployed, in fact, early this year in February, I think there was only a couple of people, as opposed to over 200 people 3 years ago lost their life. Now, the reality is the simple things that city mayor did were things such as the weather conditions are changing, and we've actually used our Deep Thunder weather prediction technology into this system, we were actually able to give a much more accurate view of the impact within a square kilometre of what that environmental situation was going to occur, which then enabled the city mayor to put out the sirens up in the favelas and to start corralling people to get out of those villages and onto the safety havens so that they could then transport them to safer ground. And the reality is that cities are actually really starting, particularly the reality of that situation. This technology is exactly the same technology that we've deployed with the Miami Dolphins. So we're deploying this from a perspective of looking at a stadium as an integrated piece. What's happening in the car park? What's happening as people are coming through the gates? The ability then, of course, to provide all of that entertainment and streaming through that system. So it has a lot of applications. And, where we're starting to think about also the role of big data is starting to also look at what we call cognitive thinking. And we will see a lot more of what I call fluid thinking in terms of making predictions and the ability of systems such as Watson to provide answers, and it can be applied in a whole range of things such as healthcare, diagnostics, law enforcement, even workforce and talent management. And as we apply that to cities, we think that's a really exciting space to be. But my final point is very clear from the perspective that there is no doubt in my mind cities will be transformed by the new energy economy. And in Townsville, we are starting to see startups who have actually rallied around this concept of sustainability and starting to build out analytics programs, sensor networks. And, I don't know if many of you have been to Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. How beautiful is it? It's like going through a scene of Jurassic Park. And we call that streetscapes, the ability of these living, breathing buildings creating these wonderful havens as people move through the city. I think there's huge opportunity in Australia for mass-scale renewables. We're seeing that play out. I know there's contention with regards to communities, but also let's bring it down to the community level. In Milwaukee, with the GFC, a lot of American cities are dying. We all know the story of what's happened to Detroit. But in Milwaukee, what they've decided to do is they're converting unused buildings to hydroponic farms. They've decided that they want to reduce the shipping and transport costs to feed their community. And it's very exciting, it's very real, and it's happening. So when we look into the context of things such as hothouses, most of the tomatoes that are eaten in Australia come from hothouses in Adelaide, and we're having discussion with some fantastic cities who are interested in understanding how we can deploy integrated analytics for energy and water to start supporting things such as community farming and hothousing. That little glowing tree, very exciting. Yes, they have actually produced a tree that actually glows, that actually it was almost like an LED light. It's a tiny little cell, but I think as we, you never know, we might have these glowing trees as street lighting in the future. And then, of course, the whole concept around battery and particularly fuel cell technology. So that's it for me from a Smarter Cities perspective.
I think we'll have to end it there. Thank Catherine Caruana-McManus for a sensational talk.